Good afternoon to everybody. Uh, Wonderful 2 days of conference. Last five sessions ran us through some very interesting themes and issues and recommendations. Um, with this, we come to the last leg of the discussion, which is the roundtable discussion, and it's my pleasure to not really moderate, but start off this discussion. And I think the panel members, I will not waste time introducing the panel members, other than maybe perhaps just taking time to introduce a research partner from the University of Westminster, Dr. Nitasha Kaur. She's been an important partner in this effort in our effort for Center for Local Governance Research in developing this idea and also in realizing this idea. So thank you so much for being with us. The roundtable meeting, to briefly maybe describe how or what we intend to do is the last 5 panel discussions, as I mentioned, touched very different themes. And by bringing in the moderators to this session, what we hope to do is the moderators highlight some of the main takeaways from their respective panel discussions. And at the same time, perhaps share some of their own opinions or thinkings that would contribute in enriching the discussion as we reach the end of the conference. I had circulated a couple of questions that we had received to be taken up during this roundtable meeting. With that, and in terms of, I think, sequencing, I'm just going to let it be very fluid, just as it progresses. So anybody who'd like to go first, please go ahead. And so in terms of timing, I'm going to try and keep track of time. We have about an hour. And since there are about 6 speakers, this is going to mean about 10 minutes each for every speaker. So within that, you can share the highlights from your panel sessions and whatever else you would like to add. May I invite the first moderator to open the discussions?
Okay.
Thank you, Namge.
Since I was the moderator for the first panel, we can just follow the sequence so that nobody feels like they're put on the spot. So I prepared 3 key takeaways from my panel and also from listening to the other panels. And I would not want to necessarily repeat or give a summary of what was said, but it's also like my general reflections and opinions. So I hope that's helpful. The first key takeaway, my panel was on economic vulnerability and climate change. And the first key takeaway is really that there is a very clear relationship between the economic health and future of our country, and not just our country, but for every country, I suppose, and adapting and mitigating to climate change. With that said, I still do tend to feel that climate change remains a very abstract and faraway concept for other people and also for all of us, perhaps. And this is evidenced by how many of our economic sectors currently have a lot to do in terms of bringing in a sustainability agenda. So every single sector or panel that we had. So we had panels on agriculture, tourism, hydroelectricity. These are all climate sensitive, but I think one of our panelists really asked the question, where is the sustainability in that? But it also means that we have a whole host of opportunities to do better. So one example would be the creation of green jobs. With that comes many employment opportunities for people, and also for people to really reskill or upskill. And when we focus on that, it also has a positive spillover effect towards solving our other problems. And the second key takeaway, I think it really wouldn't do justice if I don't bring this up, and that was Annie Chopel's talk on climate change, interdependence, and ethics. And what I really took away from that was to have public policy grounded in ethics, obviously, but also to have public policy that has people at its center. And with that comes policies that is centered on love and compassion and kindness. And we often talk about having an enabling environment. So what does that mean? I think it means obviously that we have the intention to help people, but when we think about how it's playing out in reality or out there in the field, if it doesn't help people, then do we have the courage to say, okay, scrap it, we made a mistake, we can do better? So that's something that that I've really been thinking about. And finally, the importance of hope, the importance of boosting public morale, especially in the times that we are now, because the economy is really a self-fulfilling prophecy. When people are optimistic, things do get better. When people are pessimistic, things turn out bad. But I think the public is also very intelligent in the sense that we cannot just engage in rhetoric. We also need to show people that we are doing things, especially as policymakers or decision makers or deliverers of public service, that things are going to be different now. I just took a screenshot of this very interesting comment that I saw on the Facebook live stream. So, you know, someone said, good discussion, but it will remain at the successful dialogue. The implementation agencies should have done this a long time back. So I feel like, yeah, when we only engage in rhetoric and when people know when we're not doing things differently, people know that, people know when we're not succeeding or executing our outcomes. So, you know, this shouldn't really be the case. And it's good that all of us have had time to sit down and reflect and look back, but going forward, I think action and doing something would be paramount to really boost public morale and give people hope that things really are going to be better. Thank you.
Thank you, Namge. I thought very pertinent and relevant takeaways. Just to, you know, how listening to what I realize is, I think that people have reasons to believe that whenever we engage in a dialogue, it's mostly the discussions that take place, and then which becomes reports and papers, and when it actually comes to implementation, I think that's a lot of times it has failed. And perhaps that's the reason why there's a bit of a skepticism when people see there's a discussion going on, there's a work going on, there's ongoing work. But I think what has changed over the last years in terms of dialogue is, I think these sort of discussions, dialogues have been primarily driven by this government, by the bureaucracy, and by that I mean people who actually implement the policies. But increasingly, I think the civil space has expanded, which also means that just as this dialogue is being hosted by non-governmental body, participants is a mix of people from different sectors, private and non-private. I think there is also increasing clarity that people want to engage in dialogue. And so for the government to say that if they want to engage, I think there are people who are interested to engage and there are people who can contribute.
Yeah.
And I think that sense would be, would create the environment for government to also increasingly focus their energy on not just dialoguing for the sake of dialoguing, but actually gathering intelligence, listening more seriously to criticism and comment, and maybe that could help improve policy. And I think just a few days ago, we were discussing about innovation, anticipatory governance at the UN, and all of this actually seems to say about sense making and gathering data from the ground, having a boots on ground, like they say. And I think when the data is outdated, when you don't understand how the policy is affecting people on ground, you take time to change your policy or adapt your policy. And I think when you're talking about COVID, one of the lessons is adaptability, agility, innovation, creativity. I think you can do that only when you know quickly, real time, how it's affected the people on ground. So thank you so much for sharing your thoughts. May I request Lekisa Moon, or do we go with Dr. Karma? Dr. Karma, would you like to come in?
Yes, thank you. From my session of volunteerism and public health, basically two takeaway. Just something that we could take away as one was on very clearly the theme itself. Volunteerism came very strongly yesterday in all three speakers, and in that my personal takeaway that I thought was that DSUPs played a pivotal role. In fact, when it comes to volunteerism, DSUPs were the backbone of this nation, this country at the time of COVID for last 9 months or so, and there were very special and personal stories which made the highlight of our session yesterday was that of Mrs. Devi Maya from from Samsi. I think that was a wonderful story. I think we have many more stories of this nature. I think volunteerism in true sense has been recorded, has been put into the book of our history, Bhutanese history, by these small, invisible individuals such as Mrs. Devi Maya. And the second part was public health. And again, when it came to delivery of public health and health services, I think given the COVID times again, there was a lot of urgency in sort of a need to revisit our strategies. So therefore, I think volunteerism, again, the volunteers played a pivotal role in the delivery of public health services in Bhutan during this COVID. So therefore, again, one takeaway was that there is a need to revisit and explore the concept of a people-centric approach to health service deliveries in Bhutan. And then, of course, as Madam Namgi also mentioned in her takeaway, I think this dialogue of last 2 days should not just remain on paper. If the Center for Local Governance and Research could look at having a policy brief or a policy document where each relevant agencies and ministries could be appraised and could be followed up. I think that is the way forward so that this doesn't just remain on paper and sort of wow factor of the conference and that's it, right? So my humble submission is, I think the Center for Local Governance and Research should take up to relevant agencies. I think for now I'll stop, and then maybe I have another agenda. Maybe I'll keep it towards the end of once everybody finishes. Thank you, Tashu.
Thank you, Dr. Karma. I believe my intervention earlier wasn't very clear because my voice kept breaking off, I'm told. I hope I'm audible right now. I'm going to come to Lekisa now. Leki, could you continue and share your reflections with us from your session?
Yes, thank you very much. If I share my reflections from the local government session, local government speakers, right from the GOV as well as Mami and then the chief from Election Commission have clearly shared about the critical role they have played during the pandemic time. And I think right from the district level up to the communities level, how they have played their role in terms of preparedness, recovery, surveillance, awareness programs. So all those have been shared. Most importantly, if I share my thoughts on and reflections on the role of the local government, if you see in all the sessions, we hear many times that our plans are good, but we fail in implementations. All the sessions that I have attended, one of the issues they raised was on that we fail in implementations. I think it's high time now that we understand the concept of the triple C that has been promoted in the 12 5-year plan: coordination, collaborations, and consolidations. I think it is high time that now central ministries and local government have a better engagement process. And also, in terms of the doing things, we see lots of opportunities, both at the central as well as at the local government, to shift their way of doing things. For instance, in the local government level, still we have a conventional ways of doing things or ways of planning. For instance, at the local government level, all the plans and programs are from the angle of infrastructures development, whether it's a farm road, water supply, or the renovation of temples. So beyond that, there's not much of discussions and planning process that goes in. And similarly, in the 12 5-year plan, there was a very well thought 12 5-year plan. Key local government key result area has been articulated in the 12 5-year plan document. But if you go and see the actual implementation process, it's altogether a different thing. That's what struck me most. I think there should be a better linkages between the central plans and the local government plans. There should be a better linkages and coordination between the central plans and the local government plans, and even the implementation process. So that is where we have to think more. And I think it's also important that we give a due recognition in terms of institutional setup at the local government level. That is where we are failing as of now. We think that everything is going well, or that there's enough resources down there, that everything goes well. But my speakers yesterday have shared their constraints in terms of human resources, in terms of capacity. Not largely in terms of resources. 50% of the local resources in the 12 5-year plan goes down at the local government level. It's not now, issue is not about the resources. The issue is about the institution. So in all the sessions, whether we call it, whether we talked about the agriculture productivity, whether we talked about the unemployment, whether we talk about the youth issues, whether we talk about the environment and cross-sectoral mainstreaming like gender, environment, climate change, disaster, poverty, all those issues at the local government level, there's any linkages. There's no strong linkages in terms of what we aspire and the actual implementation process. I think there's a window of opportunity for us to collaborate and understand the local government system better. And in fact, give a due recognition. If their roles, if they play a better role, give them a due recognition, consider them as a partner. And even at the local government level, it's high time that they shift their role from being only an implementer to become a facilitator. Local government should be able to play a role of facilitator. At the moment, that is a very weak. They think that they are the sole implementer. The partnership strategy at the local government level is very weak. I think central ministries, rules and regulation policies has to trigger those ripple effects in terms of triple C concept that we have articulated in the 12 5-year plan. I think that will make lots of difference in terms of achieving the goals and the implementation issues that we are talking about. We heard many times that we are good in planning, but we fail in implementation because there is any breakage or link between the central and the local government. So I think with this, I'll leave for now and we can discuss.
So thank you, Lisa. I thought in both continuing what Namgye actually started off with about skepticism because of dialogue and rhetorics. I think even Dr. Karma to some point also brought that out. And I think this is a thread that runs common because even Lekisa is actually mentioning about we're good on paper, and I think that where it's lacking is the implementation. I think really is, I think a key question here is what is it that's really affecting the implementation, or why are we not able to do it when we have a clear plan? And this is where earlier when my voice kept breaking off, this is what I was trying to get to, and that is, I think, in terms of use of data, in terms of getting feedback from the ground, policies meant to affect people in the grassroots. I think when we have a policy which is good, when we implement it, often we wait for a long time before we realize that the policy isn't working or something is wrong. And I think that's when you talk about learnings from COVID-19, agility, adaptability, a quick responsive. I think His Majesty actually outlined it very, very clearly, saying we have to learn to act very fast. We have to learn to look left and right, and then decide very quickly. Be very nimble, And I think this is something that increasingly is starting to come out, and I think we all have to work towards becoming that, I suppose. With that, I will now request my colleague to share his session. Tarchin, may I request Tarchin? Tarchin is actually part of the organizing group, but this is something I wanted to relay. Tarchin Ima, although he was moderating the agriculture session, as we know, he is also right now on duty, active duty, active duty, and because of that, he not be able to join us. So he's asked my friend Tarchin to fill in for him, and so I request Tarchin to share your reflections from the panel on agriculture.
Plus, good afternoon to all of you. Let me, in advance, say that there's some major network disruption here in Bavisa area. So if my voice breaks down, then I think it's my deep apology for the whole panel and the viewers here. But thank you, Sange. And yeah, as you highlighted, that I'll be representing the agriculture panel here. Just to mention the 3 striking points that I have gathered from the whole panel, agriculture panelists, what they spoke on the theme is that, number one is there's a huge unemployment issue. There's a huge youth unemployment issue in the country, number one. And number two, on the other hand, we have almost 70,000 acres private farmland remaining barren. And on the other hand, that we import 7.1 billion worth food items annually. So literally 3 striking points, and trying to connect, to build some connection between these 3 points. So basically located in the urban barren farmland, living across all, lying idle. The way forward here is that our youth must take up farming at large scale, at commercial scale. So this is the only way forward that I could see at this present scenario. So any policy that we propose, any dialogue that we debate, should connecting these 3 dots: youth, huge unemployed youth, 7.1 billion food items that we import annually, and almost 70,000 acres of barren farmland that we have in the country at present. This is the present scenario. Now, being a very a part-time commercial farmer, so I just wanted to highlight some of the challenges that we foresee and that we experience, and that the youths are experiencing in connecting these 2 things. It doesn't mean that our youths are not taking interest in farming. No, the only option here for us, the way forward here for us, is to employ youth in agriculture sector. So when we employ youth in agriculture sector, there are so many challenges that we confront. Number one, I totally got lost when I talked with the ministry officials about the definition of commercial farming in the country. The moment they said that if you go for 5 acres plus, then you fall under commercial farming. Now the challenge here is, the moment you close, the moment the group of youth go to the village and go for commercial farming, the moment they close for 5 acres, then they qualify as a commercial. Then there's a requirement of licensing part. The moment they apply for licensing, then there is 3 requirements. Number one is administrative clearance from GEO, technical location clearance from Dzongkhap, and technical clearance from ministry. So in a way, I'm going by step now. Let's assume a group of youth is going towards Tongsa or going towards Pemagas or Samru Dzongkhap with a concept of getting employed themselves to do with the commercial farming. The moment they go to village, they have to look for the huge acre of land. If they go for less than 1 acre or 2 acres, there's a called subsistence farming that may not qualify as a commercial farming by the if we go by the definition of the ministry. Now, the challenges here for the youth is about the proposal writing, about getting all these clearances, number one. And number two, the second challenge that I'm going to talk is about the financing part. Now, if you look at the RMA report, the annual RMA report says that the credit portfolio of all the financial institutions combines together says that the agriculture sector received only less than 5%. This itself says that our private sectors are not interested to invest in agriculture. Our youths are not getting access to financing in agriculture sector. Now, then I got the reason then why our youths are not investing, why the private sectors are not investing. Let's keep aside those rich private sectors from investing in agriculture sector. Let's focus on the youth now. Why our youth are not getting access to private financing now? I mean the financing in agriculture sector. Number one, we all know that all our land has a fragmented ownership now in the communities now. Forget about leasing of the government land, GRF land, which one of our panelists, Nimalama from Sarban, is talking about. Yes, that is the secondary part. Now, when we have over 70,000 acres of private farm land, there's no question of going after for private land. Go to the village and look for the private land, and we see the fragmented ownership, land ownership. The moment we go for commercial farming concept, the moment we go with the commercial farming concept to the community, we need to have minimum 5 acres, more than 5 acres. In that way, we need to engage, we need to tap in minimum, I mean the 10 to 15 or 20 owners of the land. And most of these barren farm land belongs to the elite group in the community, elite family members in the community. Now, when the group of youth try to access the financing part from any financial institutions, any microfinancing institutions, they demand the original land certificate as the mortgage, the copy of original land certificate as a mortgage. That is where the land ownership will refuse to give you. They demand the original ID card copy of the land ownership. And we all know that in Bhutanese, this is our culture that nobody's going to surrender the copy of their laktam. Now, if you look at the community scenario, if you go down to the community, hardly he could find few people without any loans from any of the financial institutions. Even the poorest couple in the community will have 50 to 1 lakh loans in their name. The moment they get loans, then their original laktam land certificate has been mortgaged with the particular financial institutions. So in that way, our youth has no mortgage to produce when it comes to land. And about the interest rate now, let me talk about the interest rate now. Minister of Agriculture, if you go by the definition, they said the moment we go for more than 5 acres is a commercial, right? The minimum investment that we must target for commercial farming more than 5 acres is around 10 lakhs to 15 lakhs. So the moment we cross 5 lakhs, and there's a rule by the financial institution saying that if you ask loan more than 5 lakhs, then you will be charged the interest of 7%, which is a commercial interest rate. So currently, I myself, as a co-promoter in the Lingdi Organic Farm, we have revived the 24 acres of 33 household community land, and that our 24 acres belongs to 33 owners in the community. We could not we could not get their CID in original. We could not get their land certificate in original. Now the financial institutions, we got the loan from the CSI bank at the rate of 7%, which is very discouraging. They have the policy saying that their interest rate, they will give you at 2% if you take the loan less than 5 lakhs. So when a power tiller, when a simple farm machine costs almost 3 lakhs, so what is it? So I don't see any value in going beyond. What I mean to say is what we can do with the balance money, whether to fence it, whether to revive it, whether to develop the land, or whether to buy the equipment and the agriculture supplies and tools. So this is a crux matter that our youth has been experiencing. And the third most challenging thing is about the public attitude towards the youth or the commercial farmer in the community. Now, people like the public figure, people like us, for example, if we go to the community, if we try to sell our idea on the commercial farming, and if we get the wrap on their land, then they will say that, oh, there might be profit in commercial farming. If a group of youth go to the community and talk about their interest in commercial farming, the whole community will say that, no, see, these are the jobless people coming back to the community. So this is the mentality of our society and the community people towards the youth and towards the commercial farming and the farmers, I think. And the fourth thing that challenges that is about the local government priorities. Our local government officials, they really need to change their mentality, attitude, and the prioritization towards commercial farming. If it's for subsistence farming, it doesn't matter. Even a single farmer, even a grandfather or grandmother can go for his 1 or 2 langdu, a half acre of land. What here we are talking about is we have more than 20 acres, more than 30 acres, 40, 50 acres. So our local government officials now with the allocation of local development grants, along with the guidelines, which says that the first priority should be in the food nutrition to enhance to promote self-sufficiency. I mean, if you really look at their plans, the majority of their local development grants are being allocated for their hakams, gundes, farm roads. Now, very interesting thing about the farm roads, see, what I have been observing for the last 5-6 years is that each of the communities are getting connected in the name of farm roads. So today, if a youth goes to the community, if they want to take a power tiller to their farm, there's no road. That's for sure. But in the name of farm road, each of our communities are getting connected now. One interesting thing that I have observed in the resource allocation at the local level, the mentality, the attitude, and the prioritization of the local government officials need to change. And the final thing, the final challenges that I want to talk about is the support services of the Ministry of Agriculture. They all are dispersed, both in location and in governance. Our local government at the Geok level and our local government at the Zongkhak level, they have no hand, they have no control over the agriculture supports and services. If you look at seed, it's in Paro. If you look at tools, if you look at farm machineries, it's in Paro. So it's really difficult for us from Tromsø to reach to get the supports of the farm machineries and seeds and supplies. And the moment we talk to Geok officials, Geok Arena extension officials, they have to compile the list. Then they have to submit to the Zongkhak. Then Zongkhak has to compile the list from all the Geoks. Then they have to submit to the concerned ministry or the concerned sector agencies. That really buys out our time. When I talk about the agriculture support services, so I really found that there is a serious governance issues, because even if we reach out to the Minister of Agriculture directly, so all these seeds, supplies, tools, post-harvest, everything, they are governed under different program directors. They have their own plans. They have their own priorities. So what I mean to say is there's a mismatch between the requirements in the field and the governance system of these agricultural seeds and supplies. So in a nutshell, I want to say that it is really, really challenging for our youth to go to the village, get employed themselves in the commercial farming. This is not the road ahead is very, very, very challenging. I often used to tell about the bureaucratic bush that we need to clear. It's easier to clear the bush in the 24 acres of farmland rather than it's really difficult to clear the bureaucratic bush in our support agriculture sectors and agencies. They really need to change the mentality, attitudes, and their supports and services towards, engagement of youth in the agriculture sector. If they go for subsistence farming, there's no question. No licensing requirement, no financing requirement.
Can we come back? Can we come back to you later if you have? Since you're running out of time.
Okay.
The road ahead is not. The road ahead is not smooth. It's rough. On that note, may I request Jimrinji to share your reflections from your panel? Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Good afternoon once again, everybody, co-moderators there and the viewers around the world. Starting on this bumpy road ahead, my panel had three panelists coming from diverse sort of unrelated areas. One is a civil servant from Tourism Council of Bhutan, somebody who's directly involved in promoting tourism activities. even to the extent of approving and finalizing, making decisions on tourism policies. Second one, Tashi Dema, she's a reporter from Queensland Corporation Limited. She is a reporter, and she just shared her observations, actually, whatever she has observed as a reporter, that third-party lens perspective. And my third panelist was Honorable Tempa Doji, National Council member. Being a legislator, he brought into light whatever the House, the Parliament was doing in the reviews and their, and their observations and their feedbacks on the government performance and the policy makings and all this stuff. So many things have been discussed during that discussion. Being the last panel group, honestly, I didn't get time to really also prepare as such, but thinking, just recapitulating whatever we have discussed. From the tourism point of view, all of us know that this is the most hit sector, economic sector, despite its potential to contribute to the economy, it really suffered. It took a backseat, resulting into a negative impact on the overall economy. Almost 90% of tourist arrivals have been cancelled. 4,000 something visas have been cancelled. 90% of tourist arrivals have gone down, and then more than 40% of revenue has gone down from tourism sector. This has not only affected us badly in terms of revenue generation, but in terms of ripple effect, employment. More than 50,000 Bhutanese are dependent on this sector for their livelihood. Many of them got lost, because there was no job, no tourists came in. They didn't have to go to office. So that's why the government had to really come in and then try to get them engaged elsewhere. And then that's why the 2CB was involved in pulling in the mandated non-tourism sectors rather to absorb, to help them, to help all these 50,000 plus Bhutanese to continue to survive their livelihood. In the process, we did discuss through a couple of out of the two presenters, panelists touched on this concept of all eggs in one basket. At the national level, there was a tendency, there was that expression I could understand. We are focusing too much on hydropower, too much on tourism, and even within the tourism sector, too much on specific areas. We pointed out on, as we all know, most popular tourist the subsectors within the tourism sector is cultural tour and trekking. Besides that, what are the others? So tourism, TCB has acknowledged that they need to diversify, and these are manifested in the form of Economic Contingency Plan 2020. On the other hand, tourism, the hydropower sector, although it's also blamed as a basket carrying all the eggs, but some are saying, do we have any other option, by the way? Of course, we know that climate change is there. It will hit us anytime. Our rivers are drying, but our glaciers are drying, and then the lakes are retreating. But at the same time, we see our Timpuchu running down there like that, wasting. So why don't we capitalize on this? And they're saying that hydropower is one sector. No matter how much you blame it as putting all the eggs in one basket, at the end of the day, this is the only economic sector which gives us consistent source of income. Whether there is no COVID or COVID, once we have the hydropower installed, we have this source of income. Second panelist, Tashi, touched on shortage of labor here in Bhutan. As of June 2020, our government had done some research, and then they have come out with, they noticed that our economy has been depending on 35,500 something foreign workers. Because of this COVID and the closure of border movement, many of them had to go back. And then we only had just half of 35,000. If you are talking about availability of Bhutanese youth who have these skills. So in a way, we have to replace 14,000 something we don't have. That's why this debate is now become a priority for us. So Tashi said, as an reporter, I'm sure she had observed this through the months, and then she said, on top of us, our youth not having skills, on top of us having not inadequate numbers, our policy, our rules and regulations, our systems also do not really facilitate us to work, to work wherever we can. For example, our rules will not allow us to do more than one job, starting from the BCSR, civil service rules and regulations. We will not, doctor and other civil servants, once you are in their job, you cannot take up any other job, even though you are skillfully, perfect in that area, because you're not allowed to, by the way. Practice is apparent in corporations, and even in, I'm sure in private sectors too. Now, you get this example from a model BCSR, and if there's a private entity, private limited company, the owner, the promoters of the private limited company will not allow their employees to work beyond their areas. So we are all restricting ourselves. Then now, by the way, we have been talking about our youth, although we are in numbers, but we may not possess skills. We are blaming ultimately the education system. The qualification we have acquired from our school and colleges do not really help us to find a job when you are getting into job market. So what do you do now? So this is something which we cannot really discuss over an hour or overnight, but His Majesty's Royal Address covers all these things actually. We have graduates, but cannot take up jobs which are available. On tourism front, while Damchurinzin, he elaborated too much, enough actually on this. But however, if you look at the views shared online, there were many, echoing again and again that the tourism benefits are not spread across the country. Some have even bluntly mentioned that whether it is the 12 5-year plan or the present contingency economic plan. And even if you see this, read these two phases, phase 1 and phase 2 tourism resilience strategy, which has been allocated with some 232 billion Ngiltram. Activities are all in the existing areas where the tourism activities are prevalent. It has not gone beyond Bumthang. So considering all these things, we need to really look into the coverage and the purpose behind all these economic contingency plan. We know it's affected much where it was there, but at the same time, we should not also do away from taking these activities in other areas where these are not there. And again, they're coming back to unfriendly and rigid laws. I think the earlier moderators also mentioned this. We have laws in one place, but cannot really implement this because it's been said this way. It's been said in certain manner. So with this, let me stop here, and then I will continue in the next segment.
Thank you so much. Jimmy, before I move and invite Dr. Nitasha to share her reflections, from the comment section, I've noticed that we have the head of the WWF country office who also shared a question. But maybe if I just share it here, I think this is more of a comment, because when you talk about our young people who are educated, who are ready to work, but meaningful employment not available. And I think when Namge started off with her panel, we had a lot of discussions on climate change, which also flowed through hydropower development, as you were mentioning. I think one of the concerns is the leaders of the world, they're discussing taking, I think, a little more urgency to the climate change challenge in the wake of the COVID pandemic challenge that we're all experiencing and living through. Countries and leaders are discussing their nationally determined contributions, NDC, and the climate risk mitigation and adaptation also requires expertise and abilities in people in the countries to be able to not just have the policy or adaptation, but actually to be able to implement these adaptation plans and programs. So, Ani, when we talk about unemployment, young Bhutanese, where do we go from here? Do we also just stick to hydropower and agriculture? Is tourism the only other avenue where Bhutanese people can get employed? But I think more generally speaking, if we are going to go be part of the international community, make commitments, and especially so because we are a champion in terms of environment conservation and biodiversity, I think it is important that we reflect on these. And as we talk about educational reforms, we take these into stride too. With that, I have the pleasure to invite our research partner, co-investigator, and a very important inspiration behind this whole idea, Dr. Nitasha Kaul. You have the forum.
Thank you, Sangi. So my job here is slightly, can you see me and hear me?
Yeah, we can.
Okay, great. So what, in contrast to what you all have been, doing as part of this session, which is to bring together the insights from your sessions, your respective sessions, what I see my task here is doing is to provide an overview and a rationale. So, so Sange and CLG is already aware that I will take a bit longer than the 10 minutes allocated originally. Yeah, I think we were originally budgeted for 15, but because I think that, yeah, Sange, is that fine?
Yes, okay. yes. It's already budgeted, yeah.
Yeah, okay. So I'm addressing you. I'm addressing the people who are watching this on Facebook, but I'm also going to keep in my mind that these remarks might be seen by somebody a bit later, right? Because they are going to be archived. So I want this to be something that brings together some of the things that we have been talking about. And in fact, I want to group my remarks in a reverse sort of an order. So when, you know, as an academic, when I write an application for resources on a topic, we do, you know, why this topic? Why us? Why should we be doing this? And now I want to do the reverse side of this. And I want to kind of convey some of those things to you. So I want to the first grouping of my remarks would be what is the overview of what I'm saying? And the overview of what I'm saying, my very first thing that I have to very deeply, gratefully acknowledge is the time and effort of all of the panelists, all of the attendees, people who asked questions, who were engaged, the role of the moderators. It is a great privilege to actually be in a context where people are so deeply engaged with policy and governance issues. As you might know, in most places, these issues have now become so distant from everyday people's lives that these are not the things that people talk about when they talk about politics or economy in the public sphere. So this is great, and thank you to all of you, either here or online, or those who are to come as part of what we are trying to do here. Secondly, I want to, on behalf of the Center for the Study of Democracy, which is a research center that has been a research and academic center that was set up in the 1980s. So it's over 3 decades old now, and it's part of the University of Westminster. I want to say how pleased we are with this kind of partnership, because what we do is look at critical social, political challenges, try and put them in an interdisciplinary context, and have dialogues with scholars, policymakers, activists. This is all of course, in addition to bringing research into people's lives in a way that it matters, so that there is an interconnectivity between the knowledge that is produced and the ways in which it is used. So, my gratitude. This. The Bhutan Biodemocracy and Resilience Project, this is the second conference. To those of you who are either seeing this for whom this is your first conference, or who are attending this as the first one, I encourage you to please go online to the project website and to look at the archives from last year's conference, where we had a different set of themes. I mean, of course, this year our themes have been affected a lot by the urgency of the pandemic. And so our channelization of thematic areas has been according to that. But in last year's conference too, we had a whole range of interdisciplinary areas, and some of the CLG people, Jigme Rinzin, Tharchen, and of course Sange Khandu, we were all part of that. So I would encourage you to please go and look at those archives. The project report from last year, which looks like this, it's very pretty. It's very aesthetically done, and I would like you, especially if you're a young person, if you're thinking about these sorts of things, please try and go and explore what are the sorts of deliberations that are currently forming a part of people's thought. I also want to say that in all of the sessions, both last year and this year and in the years to come, we are trying our level best in every way to have as diverse a set of participants as possible. So we want this not to be something that is just Thimphu-centric, or that is just about people who are not actually. We want this to be something that involves practitioners, people with different kinds of experiences, men, women, people from rural and urban areas, people from different regions of the country, and that's the whole idea. The idea of bringing in different perspectives, and this is why in some of the sessions from this year's conference as well, you would have noticed that people have, there's this kind of really useful dialogue that sometimes verges on the edge of friction, but useful friction, where people are talking about, the roles of the intent of legislation versus the experience of it, or the implementation of plans and where that matters. So the idea of bringing together these diverse sets of perspectives is very central to us. I am aware, and I do wish to acknowledge this, that we did have the one panel with only men in it. So we did have a panel. However, that was not our, that was in spite of and not because of what we were planning. We had, these are some of the rough notes. We had months of planning that went into this. And we did intend to have a female farmer as part of that session, because in many parts of the world, there's this kind of automatic assumption, not in Bhutan, of course, but in many places, that people associate certain roles with certain identities, and that's obviously not the case. So that was something that we are aware of. We are also aware of the intersectionality, that that if people's experiences matter, we are trying to make sense of that. So that's sort of like the first part of what I want to say. The second part of thematically of what I want to say is, why me? Many of you wondering, who haven't, I know many people in Bhutan, but some of you may not know me and would think, well, why is this Chilip sitting in London talking about biodemocracy, or what does she know about Bhutan? So I want to kind of have a kind of a little paragraph here that I want to put in, which explains to you why me. So 23 years of my life, I have been an academic, and 16 of those I have known Bhutan. First, from 2006 onwards, when I first was there, and this was around the time that the transition to democracy was about to happen. The elections were to come, those elections, and those specific elections, and that's witnessing. So witnessing that was a key part of me getting engaged with this context, and I want to actually take a moment just to thank all of the people, the wise people who are Bhutanese, who work in and on Bhutan over these years, whose thoughts and engagements I have learned from. In various, across all walks of life. So I'm deeply grateful for that, and I want to acknowledge that that many there's around the world. I have experience of multiple countries, but I think I can confidently say that I have not come across any other context where issues of policy, of deliberation, of actually trying to make the effort to do things better are done as seriously. The amount of misgovernance that is globally on display, against that, Bhutan is a tremendously useful contrast that I wish everyone would learn from, and that's often what I'm also telling the world outside. So while my sort of spiritual engagement with Bhutan, as somebody who was named Tashi before she ever knew of Bhutan, may be inexplicable, my intellectual engagement with Bhutan is very much something I can explain. So the genesis of this idea of biodemocracy, which is something that every year we have this conference, people ask, why is it biodemocracy? What does biodemocracy mean? And I did mention this last year, but just to emphasize again, the idea here is to talk about the political and the ecological and the interlinkages of those two. Because what affects people's lives is how consent is created, how people give consensus to either policies that may lead to good or bad outcomes. So the political and the ecological, especially for a small country, which is trying to do its level best, a rare, as I'm always emphasizing to people outside, a rare carbon negative country, a country that's a rarity for Asian states in being a welfare state that's actually functioning for the people. Within that context and within the high altitude kind of fragile environment, Bhutan's trying to do its best. And I think that the politics and the ecology, the interlinkages of those two are really important. So also when I first came to Bhutan, that was around the time my first book called Imagining Economics Otherwise, which was based on my PhD in economics and philosophy, came out. And what I was arguing was the link between value and values. And this is something that every time that I hear us us, everyone speak, this gets driven more to the foreground for me, that what we value is essentially very closely linked to what are the values that we want to emphasize, what are the values that we want to sort of carry and emphasize. And this is the case, for things that we reward, right? For things that are seen as part of the economy, which we pay for, as opposed to the stuff that goes unpaid. But it's also relevant when we think about things like preferences for farming, right? In a lot of the discussions today and yesterday, there was this idea of why do people think certain professions are where they want to go and certain professions aren't where they want to go. That has to do with the question of norms and values, and therefore the valuation that people therefore place on pursuing those paths. So that's another way in which I think this is important. I think and then from 2011 to 20, so after the first elections and some subsequent work, I was in fact, some of the best things have happened to me in when I've been in Bhutan. I was in Bhutan speaking at the UNDP conference when my novel was shortlisted for an award. It's like Bhutan's just like this brilliant place, and I know you think that a lot of starry-eyed people who are not born Bhutanese say that, but believe you me, I am aware of the challenges too, and that's why I want to get to 2018, because when I came back to Bhutan in 2018 after a gap of several years, what was interesting to me is the transformations that had taken place. Of course, the political, in the political sphere, of course, after the consolidations of democracy, but in terms of development, the changes that had taken place. So I just want to sort of read a couple of lines from this thing that I published in 2008. It's called Power to the People. It's about the elections that were held then. Right. So in that, I'm telling the world, like, these are these elections. There's this amazing transition that's happened. Nowhere else do people have these mock elections. There's so much effort on setting up these constitutional bodies, on trying to do these things. And towards the end, based on what I had at the time observed, I write, people have high expectations of this new system, but what are the sorts of challenges? And I say local matters will be important. For instance, distance between settlements and the nearest roadhead, affecting how quickly agricultural produce can be brought to markets, maintenance of water channels, lakangs and mule tracks, increased rural electrification and crop insurance. In urban areas, the challenges are greater, with the absence of the kind of rural farming family setup, but also unemployment, rural-urban migration, the dust pollution from increasing construction, getting volunteers to help put out forest fires. And then further on in the next paragraph, policies that need to, government policies in the future may focus on reducing dependence by diversifying the economy, curbing corruption, especially in construction, lowering unemployment amongst urban youth, generating revenue by developing private sector enterprises, promoting commerce in those Bhutanese goods and services where there is a niche market, using resources wisely, for example, hydropower. So I think that, Ani Chopal-Pamo yesterday in her brilliant presentation mentioned that when a person's going to get water, right? And then they're enlightened, they're still going to get water. You don't see the fact that they're enlightened. So essentially, the things that we have to do remain the same. It's just the way the challenges remain the same. The idea is, what sorts of transformations do we make over time to address those challenges differently? And I think that in spite of the many difficulties that public policy trade-offs are faced with anywhere, I still think that there is a lot of room for not complacency, but a great amount of confidence that I think the Bhutanese, ought to feel in how things are. I know we have been talking about, there's this that needs addressing, there's that needs addressing, and that's the point of a forum like that. But I think that there is a space for hope and optimism in terms of, of someone who's seen these changes over time. So at its broadest, I see what I see myself as doing is, kind of being that person who's talking about Bhutan, but also talking to the Bhutanese in across a range of contexts. And Sangye and Namgye and I were speaking a little bit before, and we were talking about how a lot of knowledge now is interdisciplinary. And that's really important, because disciplines should not be like silos where you are, especially in social sciences, where you are stuck in, and seeing things from certain points of view. As they say, if you've got a hammer, then everything in the world is a nail to you, because you are stuck by your tool and you think, well, that's all I can do. But obviously that's not the case. And the sessions last year, this year, all of you are aware, but I'm also virtually addressing people who may not have attended the conference. And therefore, excuse me if some of my remarks seem to be repeating things we've already gone over. So I think that in methodological terms, it's really important that we look at, what I call contextual social political economy, that these things are all always already interlinked. And we can't, I think it was Pem Lama's slide yesterday, the economy embedded within society, which is embedded within the environment. That is why we are faced with these challenges and trade-offs. And while research, which I think it was Dr. Karma or somebody yesterday who mentioned that, research isn't just degrees. Absolutely, research isn't just degrees. It's a way of thinking analytically, but also compassionately. And I think this is something really important that keeps getting foregrounded when in discussions in the Bhutanese context, that, people have to be at the heart of this. And, and where better to have this happen than in a place where monarchy and modernity can perfectly coexist. These are the sorts of things that I think make Bhutan really unique and worth emulating and learning from. The third part, moving on quickly, is why now? Well, why now? Because the pandemic happened. Why are we doing this now? We were meant to have done this in the summer. We were meant to have done this in person and perhaps with somewhat different themes. But the pandemic was something that I think globally it wasn't a binary event. So it wasn't either all good or all bad, even if people say that, it made the air cleaner. Yes, it did. But the pandemic revealed to us, I think, firstly, how great power is not great power in the traditional sense. That it means nothing if you have the biggest arsenal in the world, but you cannot provide for the security of the people. If you have people who are dying, and I'm sorry, sensitivity alert, but in the most advanced economies in the world, we had people whose bodies were literally kept in refrigerated trucks as there were needless deaths. And I'm talking about the US here under Trump. So these are the sorts of things that were not, that does not signify power. That does not signify status. That signifies systems that need addressing. And it is, whether it's New Zealand or South Korea, Taiwan, Bhutan, all of these countries that did better showed that it's not really about just resources. It's not just that if you have a lot of resources, the government will do well. Many countries with resources did not. And I'm right now sitting in London, and and where COVID has been complicated by Brexit. So I think I don't even want to go into what we are facing and how much the experience of Bhutan is valuable of the simplest of things, like extending quarantine, like taking border control seriously, like taking volunteerism seriously. All of these things are important things that the rest of the world, many countries around the world, can learn from, where instead of enlightened public policy and deliberation, what we saw was pandemic profiteering. I don't know if many people are aware of that, but this was a thing in many countries, that people saw the pandemic as an opportunity to make money at the expense of other people's lives. And so the world that Bhutan is trying to make for itself and trying to make in the world it's an uphill challenge, but it's a very valuable challenge, because if not, then that's the alternative. So security and power aren't what people have often thought they were. The other important thing I think that everyone around the world realized is that, just like with the recession that happened in 2008, that hit many economies in the world globally very badly, that these effects are exacerbated for those who are already vulnerable. So when we say, this group of people are affected by something, by a crisis, then of course that group of people are affected. But within any group, there are, as I think Dr. Karma used that phrase, these cross-sectoral effects of environment, gender, and so on. So within each of those groups, single parent households, for example, or you know, women or people who are engaged in informal or casual labor or things like that. Those sorts of people within each group are worst affected. And you know, as we continue, I think that these are some of the things that we must think of. I was very heartened 2 days ago to read on Twitter that in Bhutan there's this mandate, you know, from His Majesty that shelters for women who might have the fear of experiencing or who might be experiencing domestic violence within the lockdowns. So these are the sorts of things that actually indicate the attention to how, for every individual who is experiencing that pandemic, the structural and kind of vulnerabilities get even worse in such times, and keeping that in mind is very useful. And the themes that we chose were for that reason. Now, the next paragraph of what I want to say is the issues. So what, over the last 2 days, what are some of the really interesting things I heard? And I may have missed, of course, I mean, the session on local government, Tharchan very kindly gave me a summary of the discussions, and I understood tiny bits of it from when I learned Dzongkha in order to follow the election debates. But that session I may not have been able to grasp as much. So the need for multi-sectoral interventions, the need for, you know, I thought the whole idea of virtual tourist experience was really interesting, the move to digital. I mean, I know that in some cases where student trips, in London, for instance, with universities, that those student trips are now being conducted virtually. So those students can't actually go on trips, and therefore we pay for virtual trips. So that is something that's interesting and innovative. The need for better narratives, for compassionate public policy, good leadership at all levels everywhere. That is just so much less of a problem at the highest levels in Bhutan, which is wonderful. But one of the points that somebody raised yesterday was endogenous, what I would call, I mean, they didn't use these words, endogenous internal civic initiative. So basically, wearing your masks when the DESUPs are not around, you still wear your masks and you wash your hands, which is what Sheriff Dorji had highlighted yesterday. So the internalization and the endogenous nature of civic initiative, that is something I think is worth working with. Collective responsibility as well as individual responsibility, another theme that came up in lots of contexts. The difference of challenges in rural and urban areas, and therefore, obviously, that one size does not fit all. In fact, you might be interested to know that initially, when we were thinking of how to plan this conference, we thought of it region-wise, like because the kind of metropolitan, the kind of capital city areas, the sorts of challenges may be different from the ones in the farming areas, may be different in the ones that are more industrial, but the virtual nature of the format meant that we had to bring them together thematically. And I hope that to an extent we've succeeded. I'm certainly grateful that the technology kind of worked throughout to enable that. The perspective of, I found the session on agriculture just so fascinating this morning, because the perspective of somebody who's farming, somebody who's in FCBL, that's precisely the kind of wonderful stuff that happens when you have different points of view on the same thing, or what Tharchan was speaking about, from the point of view of somebody who's at the experiencing end of a certain policy or a legislation or a procedure, and from the point of view of someone who's tasked with enforcing it. Now, very often, and this is something I always emphasize to my students and everyone everywhere, a lot of the times conflict and problems don't happen because people are bad. They happen because people actually really genuinely believe that what they're doing is good. So the real challenge is, how do we bridge the different narratives of different groups of people, each of whom think that they're doing this for the common good? So, so that's why I think the whole question of narratives is really important. And in future work, that's Sangye and I will be part of, this is something that we want to kind of foreground, the idea of how narratives matter. The new questions and the questions that, the challenges that I thought came up in the sessions between, and this is the next second last paragraph now, The questions that came up yesterday, I thought and some of the things that I'm putting these out as a summary because I think that they merit further reflection. One was about social media challenges and the problem of fake news and and in a situation especially such as a public health crisis, the importance of having people understand and the ways in which social media can amplify incorrect information. This is something that globally has been so important as a negative driving force. And I hope that this is something that in the Bhutanese context can be addressed. So social media challenges and fake news. I was also struck when I'm afraid I cannot remember his name, but the DESUN coordinator from the East, when he was talking about he said the educated lot often are harder to convince than the farmers. He said, when we go and we tell the farmers this is what needs to be done, they pay attention, they follow the rules. But if we are people who are more educated or in a city, will tend to find excuses or reasons for not following the rules sometimes. And this is again something that is widespread. Not it's not a Bhutanese thing; it's a global thing. I think it's the way in which education can, if not, if people aren't critical enough all the time, can make people feel that they're not like everyone else. But of course, we are all like each other, and education doesn't mean make us special that we can contravene those rules. So that was another thing. Another question that other people also raised is the question of labor migration versus emigration. The idea that, that there is a labor shortage, and Honorable Lunpo yesterday also mentioned this, but at the same time, the incentives for people to not be working in those sectors, but choosing to go elsewhere or into different sectors. Another question that I think that came up, and which is a broader kind of wider thing, is prioritization of research and its links to policy. So when something is decided, kind of links back to Tharchan, but also some of the other issues that came up, empirical ones, how does that take into account the research on a topic? Now, obviously, a research paper doesn't mean that what it's stating is the truth. It's only, anything is only truth with a small t, but it's at least giving an analytical perspective, and that the demonstrable nature of that is really important. The question of Tashi Dema this morning raised this question of government, the question of savings in a macroeconomic context, the question of savings in the national economy, and the regulations around part-time jobs for government workers. Another question that Sherab yesterday raised, the idea of those who take care, the volunteers, their stress and their welfare, and their kind of once they're exhausted and they're in these really difficult situations, for being able to address their welfare. Now, these are some of the questions that I want, because this is recorded. I wanted these questions to be to be out there. In addition to, of course, the longer term questions around unemployment I did not mention, but of course that's become a much greater problem now. And other questions that people outside of Bhutan, often ask me, but this is great, but why is the suicide rate so high? So those sorts of kind of individual level questions across sectors, those are there. Some of the contradictions not contradictions is perhaps too definite a word to put on it. Some of the differences in perspectives that I thought were striking were around economic diversification versus food security. And I think that, when we say that there's good plans, but the implementation is where the problem lies, part of that is because there are different perspectives on how certain objectives might be met. And in the session on economic vulnerability and climate change yesterday, Gopal Giri was speaking about the importance of economic diversification, and saying that, we can import food grains, but we need to diversify into other areas. In other sessions, we have people who are stressing on food security. So that is something, again, the economic world especially, is made of trade-offs, but it's something to think about more closely as one goes along. Economic diversification versus food security, the organic versus scale farming, again, something that kept coming up. that the question of scale, and I quite liked how Nima Lama put it when he said, but there's also another idea of value, nutritional value. He emphasized that when he said, it's organic food it may be expensive, but it's got this other value that people often overlook. So that was really interesting. Finally, I think the last thing that I want to say, and this is my last paragraph, thank you so much for bearing with me for so long, is that with pandemic, what we've realized is that there are externalities which are so important, positive and negative externalities both. So if I get vaccinated and that means that my neighbor is saved from getting something, that is a positive externality. If I pollute and somebody else is affected by the smoke, that's a negative externality. That's what economics calls them, right? They call them positive and negative externalities. But in the Buddhist context, in that ethos, that would simply be interdependence, isn't it? This is something that when I was listening to Anish Opal-Palmo's talk yesterday, I was just thinking that, externalities are actually just modern economics way of talking about a Buddhist idea of interdependence, because our actions have consequences beyond us, whether they are good or bad. That's simply the idea of externalities. And yet this is the idea that is so significant right now, more than ever, perhaps in the context of the pandemic, whether it's about wearing masks, following rules, what a person does. So this is something that that we need to think about, how to get people to take that like endogenously very seriously. In the future, as I said at the conclusion of the first panel yesterday, a panel is not just a panel, it's not just a conference, it's not just that we'll speak and that'll be the end of it. This is already the second biodemocracy conference. There's no kind of dearth of commitment to thinking about this on the part of either me and CSD or Sangye and the team at CLG. So we want, we will be talking about these things and trying to do as much as possible to make these conversations possible. So please do communicate areas. If there are specific themes that you think would benefit from more concentrated research, please, kind of express what those themes might be. And likewise with the questions, please continue sending them. There is now a kind of online portal where we can collate these questions and ideas so as to be able to work with them and through them. Literally, I think that's just the last thing that I want to say is, there's during I think it was the Second World War, there was this very famous slogan, ask not what your country can do for you, say what you can do for your country. So I think in many contexts, it's us that can do a lot for the world around us, for our governments too, and for policymakers, by enabling them to understand this better. Beyond all that, I mean, I want to wish you a great start to 2021. Everything is transient in this world, but we hope, Sangye and I hope that we will continue this work further, especially focusing on sustainable development goals around responsible production and consumption. All of this was meant to have happened much sooner. He was actually in London when this whole thing happened, like the pandemic unfolded and all our plans had to be recalibrated. And this whole year has just been a struggle through that. But I'm deeply grateful to CLG, to Sangye especially, to Tharchin, to all of you, panelists, moderators, everyone. Please keep it going, and please keep on being the kinds of Bhutanese people that you are, because the world needs you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Natasha. I think you've made it very easy for me to close the discussion, because you've summed up the last 2 days so aptly, and you've captured the entire essence of the discussion there. But before I do wrap up, I think since the moderators have spent a considerable time and effort in ensuring that our 2 days were successful, without which this would not have been possible, I feel it would not be asking too much to bear with us a little longer, and maybe indulge our moderators with anything they would like to add before I extend thanks to everybody and close the session. So while other moderators are maybe mulling about some closing remarks, some last thoughts before we close the 2-day conference, I request Dr. Karma to share something that has come out of the discussions on evidence-informed decision-making in policy. And Dr. Kama?
Last, Dashu, thank you. I'll just spend 2 minutes, and of course there are n number of discussions related to the research and the policy. So I think Dr. Natasha also touched on it in her address a few minutes ago. I'll just spend 2 minutes on that. I mean, I have chosen just to share on the four submissions and 4 existing practices in relation to research and policy in Bhutan. This is just a personal perspective. I could be totally wrong, but it's a perspective from my side, and which are based on the observations and the experiences. At this point in Bhutan, we frankly do not have a national, proper national research strategy. When you don't have the strategy, obviously we do not have dedicated research. And when we don't have these two, very essential pillars related to research, obviously many of our decisions are made or still made on the basis of some assumptions and some personal observations. And in Dzongkha term, we always have this pumugule tuve, right? That sort of decisions probably are happening in most of it. And then I'll just take my own professional experience. In our field, in medical practice, the specialist expertise are often considered as evidence. And if you really look at the pyramid of, or the hierarchy of research evidence, an expert's view is at the bottom, right? But then the practice at this point is that is the reality. And then in the August House of Parliament in Bhutan, we often say we did some research. I mean, but in fact, it is not Gypsel. In fact, it's just not even a critical appraisal of what evidences are actually there. I think probably our honorables are just reading what is there and then not dissecting analytically and critically. I think there is no critical analysis of what is there, that figure. I think even that is happening. Probably that is and the fourth one, that again observation, a very sad reality, but truth is that quite often certain categories of professionals especially in our civil service system is pointed to the backbenchers. For instance, just to take one example, the PhDs are often barred from certain positions in the civil service. In fact, the cream, they are the real people who should actually be coming forward. And for instance, again, let's take it to the medical. I think there are portfolio announcements where say except nurses and doctors for certain positions in Ministry of Health. I think that is quite shocking. That if any other country, I think there would have been a massive outrage on many platforms. But fortunately, we don't do. That's not the way Bhutanese deal with, right? And coming to my 4 recommendations related to these 4 observations is one I think Bhutan should seriously look at. May not be the time at this point because of the COVID, but then in the near future when the time is good, is one on institution of National Research Council. I think that is an urgent need. Country like Nepal, Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, we have, I think this platform is urgent and very imminent, I think. And the other one is, I think it's time to really operationalize the Research Endowment Fund, which has been sitting for, I think, n number of years now. I think we really need to look at how to operationalize this. And then, of course, the third recommendation is, I think, civil service system in Bhutan is a pool of rich resource. I think we should encourage our civil service system to put in and institutionalize how to help our civil servants, how to facilitate our civil servants to do operational research project, small scale. Of course, the bigger ones should be given to consultants, but small scale, so that our policies are made, our policies are framed based on those operational research which are relevant. And of course, the last one, I think we really need to look at the so-called superstructures or the superstructure-based civil service. I mean, the question here is what sort of research or evidence was used to come up with such a such a very sort of restrictive nature. Again, it's very personal observation. I'm not saying this could be. Now, for instance, a certain category of civil service servants can move anywhere in any ministry, but when it comes to technical group of professionals or graduates, it's almost like you cannot move. This is it, right? You are barred here. And no, it's like very much going to a Bhutanese restaurant, okay, where one category is given a buffet of choice. Okay, you can choose anywhere, whereas one group is suddenly told that you have to eat only emadasi and rice, no other choices for you, right? So question here is, I think, how was such decisions made? Was it really a research-based, evidence-based? Was it some sort of evidence was used? The key message here is, I think we need to look at converting the civil service system, which is more full of meritocracy, hard work, robustness, and evidence-driven system. If this is not looked at, I think rightly the Royal Kasho has also come on time. But however said and done, we must also appreciate the apex body of RCC for coming up with mandatory requirement of publications now. I think this will go a long way, because just to give an example, I think in 2014 and 15, Iran and Turkey were number 1 and 2 in terms of research evidence generation in Asia. They were generating more than 30,000 publications every year in all across the field, and that's why no wonder they are doing wonderful in spite of being small size. They are nuclear power, and many of the superpowers even fear their existence. So therefore, I think research is the way to go. That's what I would like to submit, and I must submit that. And my deepest appreciation to RCC for coming up with such a bold yet very long-term, possibly with a long-term impact on evidence-based decisions and policy making. Thank you, Tashu. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Doctor. Any other moderator would like to share their closing thoughts? Yes, please. Yes.
Is it me?
Yes, Jimmy. Yes.
Thank you, Sangeet. Thank you. And then thank you, Doctor, for sharing that such thoughts which are quite relevant. To close, also, I would want to share a couple of points, not really points, but my opinion across the 2 days of workshop. One question which we got yesterday was, for my panel discussion was, why do we send our youth to Middle East, which are risky areas, while we import foreign laborers? We couldn't tackle that question at that time, so I thought I can just touch upon briefly. I think, starting from this, we need to have confidence in ourselves. I keep saying we are able people, we can do if we are interested to. I think the system and then the policy system, the entire atmosphere, environment do not really make us feel comfortable that we can do these things. We are sort of treated as we cannot do and only others can do. For instance, besides my association with CLG, with Sangeet and Tharchin, I run a private auditing firm. I'm an accountant. I studied in London 20 plus years back. I remember when Doctor was saying you are in central London. This year from 2020 onwards, actually, because of COVID-19. For instance, from the consultancy point of personal private consultants, up until now we had been our government had been floating international tenders because we couldn't think that our Bhutanese could do. But this year, what we saw was because of these restrictions, we couldn't really bring in the foreign experts, be in consulting or auditing or accounting related jobs. Then we jumped in. We are able to do the job now. So what I want to say is, starting from the biggest, the highest pinnacle of the structure, from PMO to the LG level, if you can have trust and confidence within ourselves to our youth, we'll not send our youth to Middle East, but we'll train them here. It's not that they don't have carpentry skill, but they're not shown the way. I would tend to think that way. So drawing this to the civil service reforms. Dr. I think Karma mentioned, our civil service rules are very restrictive. Even the PhDs do not find a place there, although they're the ones we should look up to. And then you also said that our parliamentarians may not be doing enough research. Could be true also, So these are some areas we need to really think loud within ourselves, except where we might have floated. And so that's how I personally would support Dr. Karma. And then to end my submission, please have faith in us. We'll believe. Let's believe in ourselves. We will do. And then, of course, we want support from the policymakers, the lawmaking bodies, and the machineries to make us all active. Thank you.
Thank you, Jimmy. Lekki and Namge, would you like to share anything? Yes, Lekki.
Okay, thank you. Just to supplement a few points. First thing, when we talk about the coordination issues, I think one of the issues is about territorial protection. I think every sectoral have their own territorial protections. I think that should be removed, and we should be working more collaboratively. And in terms of achieving the objectives, I think we are doing the same thing in Mewala. If you go down to the local government level, I think it's important to connect the dots, not to do in isolations. Any sectoral reforms or any policy reforms that we initiate has to be connected together. I think that will really help Shunimila. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Lekki. Namge, do you want to share anything?
Okay, sure. I'd like to end on a more optimistic note. So yes, we are at a time of crisis, but many times, and there are many examples where this has exactly been a very good opportunity to radically change things. So I'd like to believe that for whatever we're trying to change, now is the time. Also, I think that people are much more to new ideas and solutions. So we always complain of, okay, we just want to preserve the status quo, or we talk a lot, but we don't implement. But I think that if we take this really seriously and go forth with it, people will be very receptive to new ideas and new paradigms. So I would like to wish all of us luck in the respective sectors that we go back to, and also to the many people who are joining us virtually. They can all go back to their respective workplaces and the kind of services they deliver, and really think about what they can do differently. And I wish us all resilience. I really like that word. So thank you.
Thank you, Namge. Tachen, do you want to share anything? Okay.
Let's
Tachen.
I finally want to conclude. We need to have a serious follow. When we talk about commercial farming and connecting the youth to the farming, I need to just conclude in one sentence saying that we need to have a serious advocacy, both at the policy level, at the youth level, and at the community level. Otherwise, the road ahead for the commercial farming and the food self-sufficiency is not only rough.
Las, thank you so much to everybody. I don't want to try and attempt to summarize the entire 2 days conference, because I think Nitasha has done it wonderfully, and I do not want to water down whatever points she shared. And I think the last reflections that the moderators have shared, I think there's always been challenges, but the COVID-19 has just I suppose, made it louder, magnified the kind of challenges we have. This has actually given us an opportunity to have a deeper reflection of what do we do to move forward. So as I end, I want to go back to day 1 of our conference. I want to take this opportunity to thank His Excellency Limbo Widuji for agreeing to make time and join us and inspire the conference with a keynote address. I think Limbo, as a young icon leader, has inspired and continues to inspire a lot of people. We hope that the charge he holds of the Ministry of Labor and Employment, which is today, I think, perhaps most challenged because of the mandate. Wish him all the luck I also take this opportunity to thank the Center for Study of Democracy, University of Westminster, and very specifically Dr. Nitasha for constantly, being there to guide and infuse energy whenever our morale was down to keep this project going, and having pushed me and Tarchin to be able to deliver on it. I also want to thank each and every moderator, Namge, Vicky, Dr. Karma, Jimmy, Honorable Nima, and other panelist members who I think took time, made thoughtful contributions to this discussion. And special thanks to Tsedrup, who's there behind the scene, CLG host, who's made sure that technically we didn't fail. There were many times the signal actually broke, and if it wasn't for him, I think the meeting would have just abruptly ended. So thank you so much, Tsedrup. Tsedrup is actually the head for Youth Advocacy Network, which is it's an NGO that's under process for registration. So thank you, Tsedrup. And lastly, I think I want to thank everybody who took the time to join us on Zoom and on Facebook, who shared questions and shared comments, all of which will not be lost because the CLG will try to capture all of those concerns in the report we put together, and not to just leave it at the rhetoric as Namge was saying. We plan to hold more of such discussions, and as more discussions continue in similar themes and topics, we hope to be able to bring in people who make decisions, who influence decisions, and also track and follow what are happening in the areas that we've discussed now. So this is a work in progress. This is a loop. As we have all understood and now accept that policy making is not a linear process, but a loop process. And so therefore it feeds in and feeds out, and that's what we attempt to do. And with that, once again, thank you. And I think before I really just close the meeting, I think I just want to say that this is a very difficult time all over the world, but for Bhutan, specifically the last 2 days, I think because of the latest infections, community infections we've traced, this is a especially difficult time. And I think the motive for holding this conference and going through with the plan was also to say that the COVID infection is there. It is a pandemic, but life must go on. There are other issues we must discuss, and yeah, we must carry on. That's what I say. So stay safe, take care, and yeah, whatever we can do to help the government control and manage the infection. Thank you so much.